Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, have you ever heard something like this reasoning before? The Tempest Cleric can maximize lightning or thunder damage with Channel Divinity. You know what does lightning damage? Lightning Bolt. But Tempest Clerics don't get it. But what if we multi-classed with a class that does get it? Then we could maximize the damage, and that's 48 points of damage. Sorcerers get Lightning Bolt, and there's a subclass of sorcerer called the Storm Sorcerer. And storms, as you know, have lightning. So that is going to be an OP combo, and there is literally no additional analysis required. I'm just going to write it up and share my genius online. Now, these builds are all over the place, and I've been asked to show that build or my version of it on my channel. And I did some analysis, and it just doesn't work. There's really two main problems with this mix. The first is that the Storm Sorcerer does not add anything here. They don't get extra lightning damage spells. They don't have any unique lightning damage until 14th level. And there's just no way to work this into a multi-class that does anything even remotely effective for the level. Other than the name Storm, there's no mechanic in this entire subclass that supports this build. Now, with the first problem alone, it seemed pretty clear that if you wanted to make a Tempest Cleric maximize Lightning Bolt damage, you're actually better off with an Evoker multiclass. And then in addition, you might be able to do something like an Evoker with Potent Cantrip getting auto pushback with Lightning Lure, so kind of a reverse Lightning Lure where the save doesn't matter, and Sculpt Spells is always effective on a Blaster. But then you're investing 6 levels into Tempest Cleric, and you're just not getting enough out of it. Because the second problem with the mix that makes Tempest a poor mix with either the Storm Sorcerer or the Evoker is that there's just not enough lightning spells on their list, and definitely not enough strong ones. I mean, both get Lightning Bolt, which honestly is okay, but it's not an amazing spell. 8d6 is decent damage for 3rd level, but when we're looking at the number of creatures you're likely to get in the area of effect, you're just likely to get a lot less in a Lightning Bolt than you are in a Fireball. Now, there's pick your damage type spells, like Chromatic Orb or Dragon Breath, that can do lightning damage. But neither of those are great spells, and I mean, if you're going to concentrate on Dragon Breath, then why didn't you just go straight Tempest and do Call Lightning instead? Chromatic Orb does no damage on a miss, so you just can't count on it. And the damage scaling on Chromatic Orb just doesn't keep up, which is pretty important if you're multi-classing spellcasters. There's a few more if we move into 4th or higher level spells, but lightning damage spells generally are few and far between, and there's not a lot of effective ones. So whether you go Evoker or Storm, if you multi-class with Tempest 2, you end up casting weaker spells, and that once per short rest max damage just doesn't make up the difference. And if you compare a straight Evoker or Sorcerer with Tempest 2 Evoker or Sorcerer, they're just not close. Now, if you multiclass Tempest 6, you get a nice pushback ability. But you're so far behind in spellcasting, and you're casting those weaker lightning damage spells on top of that, and so it actually ends up being an even worse mix. So when I was asked to do this, I took a look at some of the builds online, and I was frankly just unimpressed. And working with the build myself, I found I just couldn't make it work to my satisfaction. So that's why you've never seen any working of that build on this channel. But then came Tasha's, and suddenly we can cast Lightning Ball, and Wall of Lightning, and Everd's Lightning Tentacles. The opportunity to make this build work actually appeared. So today I am presenting the Shock Jock. But before we get into the build, I would like to thank some of the patrons of this channel. The Tree Monk Temple patrons help me dedicate the time to present what I do on this channel. Patrons receive rewards like ad-free early releases of these videos, and my top-level patrons can join me to play some D&D each month. If you would be interested in supporting the channel, a link's provided in the video description. Today I would like to thank Dank Train, Dash Panther, Dave Peters, David F., Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Don, Douglas Reynolds, Ed Iverson, and Eric Wasserman. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Let's get started. So the idea of mixing Tempest Cleric with a more lightning-focused class online tends to be the second level ability, which allows you to use your Channel Divinity to maximize lightning or thunder damage once. For me, this has never been a big draw, simply because lightning and thunder damage spells tend not to be at the top of my list once we get to the bigger blasts with third level spells and higher, and number two, putting yourself behind 2 levels in spellcasting is probably a bigger hindrance than the single maximized spell can make up for. However, the only reason I ever considered this multiclass at all was the 6th level ability from Tempest, and that's the Thunderbolt Strike. Whenever the Tempest Cleric does lightning damage to a large or smaller creature, they can push them 10 feet away from them as well. This is not limited in uses beyond the number of times you can deliver lightning damage, and it's not limited to a single creature, and there's no saving throw. So even after Tasha's and a whole bunch of force movement options have appeared, this one still stands out as one of the best. Unfortunately, the Tempest Cleric doesn't deliver much in the way of lightning damage, so they really can't use it very effectively. With Tasha's, though, we can change our damage types, either using sorcery points, or even easier with an Order of Scribes Wizard just by holding our spellbook. So once all the damage spells can be turned into lightning spells, and we get opportunities to force move large numbers of enemies, potentially several times with the same spell, on top of doing damage, now we're talking. We need to acknowledge that this build has some challenges. The first is that Cleric and Wizard need different ability scores. Now, if we're just going to dip Cleric for a level, we can get away with a 13 Wisdom easy enough. But if we're going to go 6 levels of Cleric, sitting on a 13 in our primary ability for 6 levels is going to be a drag. Secondly, we need to acknowledge that this caster is going to be able to cast nothing over a 3rd level spell from levels 5 through level 12. That means by the time we get our first 4th level spell, the Paladin or Ranger straight class is getting a 4th level spell at the same time. Now, to be clear, we will be doing just fine when it comes to spell slots. In fact, we're going to have the same spell slot progression as a full caster, and we'll be able to upcast those 3rd level spells into 4th or 5th or 6th level spells. But there is going to be a lot of upcasting of lower level spells, which isn't as effective generally as casting high level spells. So what we really need is for those lower level spells that are upcast to be enhanced enough by the auto pushback to make them worthwhile. Now, having completed this build, I can say that if you are playing in a campaign that is going to wrap up by level 10, this is not the build for you. This build is going to be great at pushing enemies around, but that's going to really be coming into full swing in Tier 3 play. If you aren't going to be playing much Tier 3, this probably isn't worthwhile. And when you get to level 17, there's nothing you're going to be able to do that compares to what 9th level spells can do. So I think the sweet spot for this build is in that 11 to 16 level range. I'd say level 13 is a real sweet spot here. So let's go through how this build works. So I'm calling it the Shock Jock, and it doesn't require any campaign-specific material. We can just use the Player's Handbook and Tasha's and Xanathar's, and we're good. In fact, we could probably even get away without Xanathar's easy enough. We're also probably not going to need Customize Your Origin or the optional class features. If you are allowed optional class features, of course you should take them. Things like being able to change your Channel Divinity into a spell slot is just a nice option to have in case you don't use it. Now, when it comes to race, I recommend the Variant Human. Largely this is because there's not a lot of races that are going to do much for lightning damage. You can certainly get lightning resistance, and you could get, the dragon breath of the Dragonborn, but that's not a very effective dealing of lightning damage. But the bonus feat of Variant Human is something we can definitely make use of. When it comes to the bonus language, I think Primordial makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to ability score increases, I think the way we want to go here is we're going to grab Constitution and Intelligence. For our bonus skill, I'm recommending Perception. And for our bonus feat, I'm recommending Warcaster. Warcaster is generally a feat I like to grab early on in any spellcaster, so Warcaster makes a lot of sense here. But also, I should mention that in order to change our damage types on spells with Order of Scribes, we need to hold a spell book. And that means we might not have free hands, especially if we want to use a shield. And Warcaster is going to allow us to continue to cast our spells while wearing that shield. Now with our starting class, I'm recommending you go Cleric first. This is going to give us armor right off the bat, and it can be part of our starting equipment at level 1, which is kind of nice. And Tempest Cleric is pretty strong at low level, so it's going to give you a little more bang for your buck at that low level of play than playing a very low level wizard will. So of course we're going to choose the Tempest domain, and for proficiencies, I'd recommend anything that uses your wisdom or intelligence is probably good, so whatever fits your character. So in this case, let's go ahead and pick history and insight. For our 3 starting cantrips, I recommend you take guidance, and then I would probably recommend some kind of ranged damage spell, because we're going to have limited ranged options otherwise, so Toll the Dead is probably our best bet there. And for our 3rd cantrip, Light is a decent choice, Mending's a decent choice, Spare the Dying is a decent choice. It really just depends on your personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and take Spare the Dying here. Now with our first level spells, we're going to have Fog Cloud prepared and Thunder Wave prepared all the time. They're both decent spells, but they're probably not the first spells I'd be casting with this character. I think the first spell I would be casting is Bless. This is going to not rely on our wisdom in any way, and it is one of the best, maybe the best, first level cleric spell. I also recommend Healing Word. This does technically rely on our wisdom to a certain degree, but not a lot, and that one difference is not going to make much difference. Mainly, Healing Word is a bonus action way to bring up an ally that's gone down at range. Being that this is likely going to be using up all our spell slots anyway, might as well grab a ritual for our 3rd spell, so I'm going to grab Detect Magic. So at level 1, we're going to get Wrath of the Storm. This is going to allow us to rebuke attackers. It gives us a use of our reaction, basically. So if a creature that's within melee range hits us with an attack, we can use our reaction, and they're going to take 2d8 lightning or thunder damage if they fail a dexterity saving throw, or half as much on a successful one. And we can do this twice. Now this is one of the hardest parts of the first level build, is the ability scores, because again we need to remember that this character is eventually going to be more of a wizard than they are a cleric. And it is tempting to put a 13 in intelligence so we can eventually get into wizard, but that is going to cause us big problems once we get a number of levels of wizard and we're casting more wizard spells than cleric spells. But we're going to be taking 6 levels of cleric here straight before we go into wizard at all. And do we really want to have a cleric that's working off a 13 wisdom for 6 levels of play? I don't think so. I don't think that is going to be very effective for us. Even though I think a cleric can get away with a lower primary ability score than a lot of other spellcasters, I still don't think it's something that we want to put right at a 13. So I'm going to recommend a 14 wisdom. Now that's going to put our difficulty class 1 behind where it normally would be for a cleric. That one difference isn't going to make a massive difference. Again, with a cleric, I think we can get away with it because a lot of our spells aren't going to be heavily dependent on wisdom. A 13 in Constitution is going to get us to a total of 14, which is fine. It's not amazing, but considering the multi-class we're doing here, 14 I think is perfectly fine. Now with the intelligence, we're going to do a 14 here, which is going to give us a total of 15. And that means by the time we get into wizard, we can make this a 16, which is an okay intelligence score. Then we're going to want to either do strength or dexterity, depending on whether we're going to wear medium or heavy armor. I think dexterity is probably our better bet, because it is going to be more relevant if we're making saving throws, for example. It also is going to help us with initiative, and strength will not. And that gives us 1 point remaining, so you can throw that point wherever you want. Let's go ahead and throw it under strength. For background, take whatever you like. I'm going to grab Sailor here. I mean, I already have Perception, so I'm going to be picking something else, and it'll give me Athletics. I think just thematically, if I'm playing a Shock Wizard, it's kind of cool to envision him on the high seas. But for my second skill, let's grab Survival. Now with starting equipment, Mace and Warhammer are both terrible for us. So we'll just pick one, but we probably won't use either of them. And then we're going to get scale mail armor. We're going to grab a light crossbow and 20 bolts. And we're going to grab an explorer's pack. And we'll throw the emblem on our shield as our holy symbol. So our first level character's doing okay. They have a decent number of hit points. They have a good armor class. The one area they're going to struggle a bit is with attacks because we're working off a 14 ability score. Now, we probably want to pick up a rapier, which is going to be the best melee weapon we can hope to get, or we could unequip our shield and use a light crossbow, but in either case, is that going to be a great attack? Main thing we're going to do is on round 1, we're going to cast Bless, and we're going to make everybody else better. Honestly, I'm not even sure I would use the Bless on myself, though maybe if I thought I was going to be making concentration saves for the Bless, it might be worthwhile, but definitely on your offensive characters that are making those attack rolls, get the Bless on them on round 1, and that is going to make up that difference. So as I mentioned, we're going to stick with Cleric for 6 levels. So at 2nd level, we're going to get our Channel Divinity, and basically what this is going to allow us to do, in addition to maybe turning undead, which is still probably the most effective use of a Channel Divinity for a Cleric if it comes up. But the other thing we can potentially do is when we deliver thunder or lightning damage, we can use our Channel Divinity to deal maximum damage instead of rolling. Now at low levels, throwing this on a Thunder Wave or a Shatter isn't a terrible use of this ability. At 4th level, we're going to get an ability score improvement, and this is the point where we want to get our intelligence score to 16. Now, as I went through on my Tasha's feat video, there's actually a lot of good feats now that can boost your intelligence. Now, I'm going to take telekinetic with this particular build because we are going to be focusing on force movement. And another thing is if we're not using our bonus action already, this is going to give me a way to use my bonus action every round. The reason we're taking Tempest Cleric to level 6 though is for Thunderbolt Strike that is gained at 6th level. At 6th level, when you deal lightning damage to a large or smaller creature, you can also push it up to 10 feet away from you. Strangely, the straight Tempest Cleric has very few lightning damage options. This is the reason we want a multi-class Tempest Cleric with something else. We're going to add one more cantrip. I'm going to add light just because I don't have dark vision, and although we can certainly use things like lanterns and torches, light is a little more convenient. In terms of the spells I would add, I'd almost certainly add Aid. That's a great spell. It also upcasts really well, which works really well with a multi-class casting build. And finally, Aid isn't going to rely on our Wisdom score, so this is a perfect pick for this build. I'm also going to recommend picking up Spiritual Weapon. Now, I don't think Spiritual Weapon is a must for this build like it is with most Cleric builds. With a standard Cleric build, Spiritual Weapon, I don't even think about it, I just grab it. In this case, we already have another use for a bonus action, potentially, if we can use Telekinesis effectively. But we don't have that until level 4, and even then, it's not something you can use every round effectively. So, we do want something to do with our bonus action. Now this is going to be a little bit less effective than if we were playing a high wisdom character, but it doesn't use our concentration, so if we're not using our 2nd level slot or anything else, it is going to increase our offense regardless. But our 3 additional spells, I'm going to take all as 3rd level spells. Now we're going to have Call Lightning automatically, which I'm probably not going to cast very often, and we're going to have Sleet Storm automatically, which I think is actually still pretty good to cast. And so we're going to definitely get use out of Sleet Storm, and it's something that we might be able to use even more once we get additional force movement options. But I am going to suggest picking up Spirit Guardians, even though it isn't lightning damage, it's still a good spell. And remember that there are nice effects of Spirit Guardians like the reduced movement that affect you regardless of our character's wisdom score. And it's going to do decent damage even with one lower DC. I'm also going to recommend Revivify. It's a good spell, doesn't rely on wisdom. And I'm going to recommend Water Walk, just because I think it is a reasonably effective ritual that does come up. And as we move up in level, we're going to be using less and less of our slots on Cleric spells and more of them on Wizard spells, which makes things like rituals in our Cleric slots make a lot more sense. Especially rituals we might have trouble fitting on with our Wizard spells. Now, fortunately for us, Cleric is a pretty good class for the first 6 levels of play, and because of that, our 14 wisdom should be enough to have this character be at least moderately effective. They'll probably be a bit less effective than a straight focused cleric, but it's not going to be a huge difference. So we're still going to not find in play that we're feeling useless, and I hate that. I don't like those in my builds at all. I think this is a build you could play to level 6, and you're not going to feel terrible for playing a cleric with a 14 wisdom. But at level 7, that's when we're going to start multiclassing this and take advantage of the higher intelligence score. Eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to grab Wizard 7. Now this is an unusual mix. Usually when I'm multiclass spellcasters, I'm dipping. So with a 13th level build, I would expect to have 1 level in a spellcasting class, maybe 2, and everything else in a different class. So having them evenly split is weird, but there is a reason why we want to do it this way. So as a standard wizard, we're going to have Arcane Recovery. That allows us to get a little bit of our spells back on a short rest. The Arcane Tradition, as I mentioned, is going to be Order of Scribes. One nice thing about doing Order of Scribes is our Wizardly Quill allows us to scribe spells very, very quickly. In fact, the Wizardly Quill allows us to scribe a spell in our spellbook 60 times faster than the normal wizard. So if a normal wizard finds a 4th level spell, they basically need 8 hours to get that spell transcribed into their book. We need 8 minutes. So we don't have to rely on there being a lot of downtime to get the biggest advantage of having a spellbook. What this build really relies on, though, is the Awakened Spellbook. This allows us to use our spellbook as a spellcasting focus for our wizard spells, and when we cast a wizard spell with a spell slot, we can replace its damage type with a type of another spell that appears in our spellbook, as long as the latter spell is of the same level as the spell slot we expand. So to put that a little more briefly, all we need is any spell that references lightning damage in our spellbook. We don't have to have it prepared, and any other spell of the same level that we cast, or a lower level spell that we upcast to that level, we can alter their damage type to lightning. And finally, when we cast a wizard spell as a ritual, we can choose to use the regular spell casting time instead of the ritual casting time, once per long rest. Now normally, I don't consider the changing of spell damage type to be all that impressive. It's occasionally useful, but for the most part, you can cast Fireball all day long, and most creatures are not going to be resistant or immune to that damage. But in this case, because of the additional push effect we get with lightning, we're getting a lot more out of this. For our ability score improvement at 4th level, I'm going to recommend Resilient Constitution, because we are going to be using some concentration spells, and if we're going to be using concentration spells, we definitely want to keep our concentration up. And Resilient Constitution is going to be our best bet of doing that after Warcaster, which we already have. Now this puts our Constitution to 15, so if you were going to continue taking this character up to higher level, and you got an additional ability score improvement, which we would if we carried it 1 more level, then what I would probably look at is another half feat that boosts our Constitution, and that way we get our Constitution up to a 16 in addition to the half feat. Finally, we get Manifest Mind, which is a really nice ability. It basically gives us a moat that we can move around, and we can cast spells through it to a limited degree. We can see through it, and we can move it around with our bonus action. This can be useful in terms of scouting. It can be useful just to look around a corner that might be dangerous, or you can send it any of the places where you wouldn't necessarily want to go, but you want to check them out. Or just in combat, it can be useful to have a secondary location that might be the origin of your spellcasting. So you could cast a touch spell where you normally wouldn't. You can place cones better than you normally would be able to. We can often bypass issues with range. Now, there is a limited number of times per day for that, but you're going to get use out of every single one of them. So in terms of cantrips, what I'm recommending is you grab Firebolt, Lightning Lure, Minor Illusion, and Shocking Grasp. This is going to give us a couple lightning damage options. One is a save, one is an attack roll, and they're both going to give that automatic movement, which makes them a little bit better than they normally would be. And with Lightning Lure, we might have the opportunity to pull somebody 10 feet and then push them 10 feet. And that might allow us to take advantage of areas that might increase our damage output. Minor Illusion, always a good spell. And Firebolt gives us just a good range option. And Firebolt is going to do as much damage as possible for us for a cantrip. We cannot switch it to lightning damage, but it's not something we're going to rely on a whole lot anyways. We're going to have a fair number of spell slots. With level 1, the first spell I'm going to take is Absorb Elements. The first thing that does is it satisfies our requirement for a spell that references lightning damage in the spell description. So now any first level spell I cast, if it does damage, I can switch it to lightning. Also, Absorb Elements is a good spell, and it's a spell I would normally take anyways, even if it didn't reference lightning. So it kind of just hits two birds with one stone. Comprehend Languages is a good ritual. Find Familiar is a great ritual. Grease is a good spell to take, but it's not one I'll prepare at higher levels. But at lower levels, I will. And the reason is when we're doing forced movement, having a non-concentration casting that we can put, and we can push creatures into it, and they're going to have to make a saving throw or something bad happens, is good. But we're going to have better options than Grease later on. So Grease is definitely something I would take at early levels, but we can't really afford the preparation at later levels. Magic Missile is a great spell for us here because we can switch it to lightning damage. And because we can switch it to lightning damage, that's an automatic pushback. Now you're going to want to check with your DM, because some DMs are going to treat Magic Missile as a single hit, and other DMs are going to treat it as 3 separate hits. The latter is way better for this build if your DM goes for it, because then that means you're going to push back that creature 3 times with no save automatically each time you cast Magic Missile. And that's a first level spell. And we can upcast it. And by upcasting it, we can potentially push 40 feet, 50 feet. But even if your DM doesn't go for that and treats it as a single damage, it's still really good. It's an automatic pushback. Or we could shoot it at 3 separate creatures and push them all back 10 feet. So Magic Missile must have on this build. Shield is a great spell for wizards, and I like it here. And Unseen Servant is a good ritual. Now there are a couple spells here that I would consider, and you might want to consider them. One of them is Ice Knife. Now the reason I would consider Ice Knife is because Ice Knife has a chance to do damage twice. And if you can do damage twice, then you can push back twice. However, just be aware that requires a to hit roll for one set of damage and a failed save for the other set of damage. So there's a chance you won't push it all with it. The other one I might consider is Thunderwave. Now, we can already cast Thunderwave as a cleric, but what we can't do is switch that to lightning. But with Wizard, we could switch it to lightning, and if we did so, we get the 10-foot pushback from doing lightning damage, and potentially another 10 feet if they fail their saving throw. So a potential push of 20 feet to multiple creatures. So those didn't make my list, but they were definitely considerations, and I think they would be okay on this build as well if you wanted to go that way. With second level spells, I first am going to take Dragon's Breath. Not going to prepare it, it's just so I can get lightning on my list. Then I'm going to pick Misty Step, Tasha's Mind Whip, and Web. Misty Step, just a good spell on wizards. You want to have maneuverability, and you especially want maneuverability if you have a force movement effect that pushes things away from you, because it allows you to change that direction a little more effectively when you need to. So it's kind of a tactical spell. Tasha's Mind Whip is a good spell for us because it targets intelligence, which means creatures are more likely to fail their save, and we can switch it to lightning damage, which means we can get the force movement out of it, and it can make a creature choose between moving or doing an action. And when you can combine that with force movement, that can be really effective. And Web is a fantastic spell for this because it's creating an effect that we can push creatures into. And when they get pushed into a web and they fail their save, they're restrained. Also, you got a creature in a web, hit him with a Tasha's Mind Whip, that's a great combination. It occurs to me I should probably mention why it's a good combination. So, if you have a creature that is in a web and it is restrained, and you hit it with a Tasha's Mind Whip and it fails its save, on its following turn, if it wants to try to escape the web, it needs to use its action. But if it uses its action, then it can't use its movement, which means it can't leave the web, and then it's just going to have to save again the following turn. That's why it's a good combination. So when it comes to our third level spells, I'm going to recommend Fireball, Leomund's Tiny Hut, Lightning Bolt, and Thunderstep. Now, with Leomund's Tiny Hut, that's just a great ritual to have, and we don't need to prepare it. And our preparations are pretty tight, so that's a pretty good idea. Now, Lightning Bolt is the spell that does lightning damage, so this is going to allow us to do any third level spell with lightning damage. And Thunderstep and Fireball, again, both good spells, but Fireball, one nice thing about it over Lightning Bolt is it is far easier to place, has much better range, it's going to cover a bigger area, it's going to likely hit more creatures. So if I'm casting a third level spell and I want to do damage, good chance I'm going to want to do a Lightning Ball instead of a Lightning Bolt. And then Thunderstep is a great teleportation spell, allows you to bring along a passenger, which is really useful. And Thunderstep does thunder damage, but we can change it to lightning damage. And that means that when we do our teleport, we can also push creatures away at the same time. And it's one of those spells where they save for half damage, which means they're always taking some damage, which means you're automatically going to get the pushback. Now, the reason I'm preparing Lightning Bolt is because we have higher level slots. And the issue about higher level slots with this build is that means we can't have any lightning spells in those slots if we don't have any spells in those slots. So we need a lightning spell that we can upcast. So Lightning Bolt is that spell that we can upcast. So when I'm using third level slots, Fireball, switching it to Lightning Ball makes a lot of sense. But if I'm going to use a fifth level slot, Lightning Bolt is something I can upcast and get that max damage, maybe with my Channel Divinity, and I can get that lightning damage which I need for the pushback. And then when it comes to fourth level spells, I'm going to recommend Black Tentacles, Fire Shield, Storm Sphere, and Wall of Fire. Now, Storm Sphere is the lightning spell, and Storm Sphere, Lightning Bolt, is that lightning spell that we can upcast, and so we can upcast our Storm Sphere as well. One nice thing about Storm Sphere is it is doing lightning damage with a bonus action. So we can do a bonus action pushback on our turn. Now it does require a to hit roll, so if you don't hit with a Storm Sphere, it's not going to push somebody back. But it being a bonus action means that we can often combine it with a different lightning spell and get multiple pushbacks in the same round. Fire Shield is a great spell to switch to lightning, because then what we can do is anytime a creature hits us with a melee attack, they're going to take lightning damage and they're automatically going to be pushed away from us. And it doesn't require concentration, and it has a pretty good duration. So we can often use it for control, for defense, and to do some damage to enemies. And Wall of Fire, switched to lightning damage, is also really good, because we can often get that damage from the Wall of Fire more than once. Wall of Fire is one of those spells that if I'm going to cast it and do damage once, it's not a great spell. But if I can do damage twice with it, then it's okay. If I can do damage 3 times or more with it, then it's a really good spell. And if I can do damage 3 times or more with it and push enemy creatures around, then it's an amazing spell. And I think to show you how good it is, I really need to show you on a battle map, which I'm going to do next. The final spell I'm going to take, Black Tentacles. I might prepare Black Tentacles sometimes. I might prepare Fire Shield sometimes. It depends on what I expect I might want to do. But Black Tentacles is also a spell that ends up being really good if you can change the damage to lightning, because Black Tentacles is already a good spell. It's got good control, does some damage, but if we make that damage lightning and we're pushing creatures away from us, we might also be pushing them further into the Black Tentacles or on the other side of the Black Tentacles. Then they would have to potentially go through it again to get to us, which would make another saving throw. They'd have to go through difficult terrain. They might not be able to make it through. And even if they could make it through, if they fail that save, then they're going to become restrained and take damage. And Black Tentacles is also, the way it is written, actually works really nicely with this as well. Because what it doesn't say is if you're pushed outside the Black Tentacles, that the restrained condition ends. And that's kind of unusual, that you would have this effect. But you make the save, you're entangled, and that's it for the duration of the spell. The only way you can get out of it is by using your action to make the strength or dexterity check, which you must succeed in order to end it. So you can actually push somebody out of your black tentacles with the lightning damage, and they will remain restrained and on the other side of the black tentacles from you. So then, even if they broke that restraint, then they would have to go back into the black tentacles and potentially get restrained again, and potentially pushed back again. Okay, so let's say we're fighting this spidery creature. I haven't really worried about what kind of monster it is, but we want to take care of this creature. So what we would do is we would cast Wall of Fire, except we would change the damage type to lightning. So we'd be making a Wall of Lightning. Now with a Wall of Fire, you can make it into either a wall or a circle shape. So in this case, we're going to choose the circle shape. As you can see, I have set up a circle shape Wall of Lightning. Now it might look like a square. If you don't know why circles look like squares in D&D, then check out the video that I have posted in the video description. But it doesn't matter. If you want it to look like a circle, you can have it look like a circle. But one way or the other, this is a 20-foot diameter circle Wall of Lightning. So I cast this Wall of Lightning, and I have it so that the damage is facing inwards, because you choose a direction when you make a Wall of Fire, and same if you make a Wall of Lightning. So I do so, and you can see that the wall intersects a space which this creature is in. So immediately upon casting, this creature has to make a saving throw. And whether it makes the saving throw or not, it will take some lightning damage. It will take less if it saves, but it will still take damage. So as soon as it does, then it is going to be pushed back 10 feet into the wall. Now, at this point, we are at the end of our turn, and this creature can no longer see anybody outside. So if it has spells that require sight or abilities that require sight, it won't be able to do them. But things are bad for it, because on its turn, if it stays where it is, at the end of its turn, it will take damage. So it has to try to get out. But what will happen is, no matter what way it goes, soon as it goes to the point where it is moving through the wall, it will immediately make another saving throw, and whether it makes a save or not, it will take damage. And once it takes damage, it will be pushed back again. And suddenly, it's back in the middle again. So not only have we automatically been able to do damage to it twice, but also we have potentially interfered with some abilities, and also we have made it so that its movement is hindered. Now it can go through again, and as long as it has enough movement to get outside the wall, then it won't take damage again. But if it doesn't, if it only has enough movement to get into the wall, then at the end of its turn it's going to take more damage and get pushed back in again. But let's say it has enough movement and it is able to get out of the wall. So then what do I do on my turn? Well, I'm going to cast anything. I could cast a first level magic missile, push it right back in again, and as soon as it goes through the wall, it's going to take the damage, and it's right back where it started. And so then I'm hitting the damage on the Wall of Fire a third time, and then once it wants to get out, it will be taking damage a fourth time. And that's the idea here, is that Wall of Fire is a so-so spell if you can only do damage once. It's a decent spell if you can do damage twice. But once you start doing damage 3 times, 4 times, it becomes a really good spell, because it's 5d8 damage for taking the damage once. But by the time we're taking it 4 times, now we're looking at 20d8 damage. And like I said, we're also removing the ability of it to see. We're removing some of its movement speed. Now someone's going to ask, why don't we make the Wall of Fire look something like this? And the issue here is that shapes like this are not supported by the rules. There are a lot of wall spells in the game that use 10 by 10 foot areas that you can arrange however you want as long as they're all connected. Wall of Fire just isn't one of those. Wall of Fire, you either make a wall or you make a circle, and it can only be one of those two. And Jeremy Crawford has clarified that's not by mistake. The Wall of Fire spell can form a straight line or a ring only, officially. Your DM may let you shape it though, so by all means check it out with them, but officially speaking, there's no support for that. So that is the Shock Jock. I want to thank my patron Cass Byrne, who helped consult with me on this build and gave me some great ideas like the synergy with Magic Missile and Ice Knife. So thank you, Cass. Your insights were really helpful. So that's the Shock Jock. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next time.